Stewart. Well, I have it just after 3:30, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. My name is Teresa Kimker. I'm the chair of the St. Paul Heritage Preservation Commission, and I welcome you all to our virtual meeting of February 8, 2021. Just for the record, I'll state that the Heritage Preservation Commission reviews applications for projects at heritage sites or within heritage districts within the city of St. Paul. And the commission also serves as an advisory body to the mayor and the city council on municipal heritage preservation matters for the city. All of the documentation utilized for this meeting is available on the commission website at www.stpaul.gov/HPC. And no new documentation will be discussed or recognized. During the meeting, please mute your microphones except when recognized by the chair to speak. And after being recognized by the chair, commissioners and staff will need to state their name before speaking, and everyone else needs to state their name and address before speaking. All deliberation and voting will be done via a roll call conducted by the chair, and staff will be monitoring and muting microphones as necessary. So I'll start with a roll call. Commissioner George.
Present.
Hello. Commissioner Brt, you are here with.
Yeah, I am. Thank you.
Commissioner Douglas.
Yes, present.
Hello. Commissioner Lubke. No. I know Commissioner Wagner is not going to be with us today. Commissioner Peroka. I thought he intended to be with us. Commissioner Peroka. I'll come back to him. Commissioner Nelson.
Here.
Hello. Commissioner McDonald, you're here, right?
Here.
Hello.
Hi.
Let me go back to Commissioner Lubke and Commissioner Peroka. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. And we have an agenda. Do I have a motion for adoption of the agenda?
This is Commissioner Brt. I so move.
Thank you. How about a second?
Commissioner George, I second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the agenda? If not, I'll go through the roll to see for approval of adoption of the agenda. Commissioner George, do you approve that motion?
I approve.
Commissioner Brt?
Approve.
Commissioner Douglas?
I approve.
I'm going to try Commissioner Lubke again. Commissioner Peroka? Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
And Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Okay, the agenda is adopted. And then finally, or not finally, but the next item is just to see if there's any conflicts of interests. Commissioner George?
None.
Commissioner Brt?
None.
Commissioner Douglas?
No.
Commissioner Nelson?
No.
Commissioner McDonald?
No.
And also none for me. Then our next item is the minutes for the December 28th Executive Committee meeting. And I guess we have minutes for the December 8th Executive Committee meeting and the January 11th HPC meeting.
Chair.
Yes.
Okay. The executive committee meeting minutes were not posted, so unless we attended and somehow got copies, we don't have them. If they're available to just glance at.
I think they were posted late. I got them.
I checked this afternoon and they weren't.
Hmm.
The agenda was posted, but I did not see the minutes.
This is Commission Chair. This is George Gauze. We can work to get those posted. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what happened on that. So we'll get them posted, and we'll just delay the December 28th Executive Committee meeting minutes to the next meeting.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, then how about we'll just take a look at, or we'll just address the January 11th HPC meeting minutes then. Are there any major edits needed on the submitted minutes? Commissioner George?
Not that I see.
Commissioner Brt?
Nope.
Commissioner Douglas?
No.
Commissioner Nelson?
I approve them as is.
Pardon me?
They're fine the way they are.
Okay, Commissioner McDonald?
No.
Okay. So if the minutes are true and correct, is there a motion for approval of the minutes as true and correct?
This is
Commissioner
Commissioner.
Brt, yes.
So move.
And a second?
Commissioner Douglas, I second.
Thank you. And on that motion, Commissioner George?
Yes, I approve.
Commissioner Brt?
Yes.
Commissioner Douglas?
I approve.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
And Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Thank you. So then the first item of business on our agenda is the CLG comments on the Gold Line bus rapid transit system. And we have a staff presentation on that.
We do. This is for the CLG comments for Metro Transit's Gold Line BRT, particularly the station placement. And Commission Chair here is Commissioner Prutka. Just came in. So in April of 2014, the Planning Commission initiated a planning and zoning study for station areas along the proposed Gold Line bus rapid transit, otherwise known as BRT line. The station area plans study area contains several known historic resources. The station area plans addressed historic resources in three main ways. Confirms the work should conform to the program for preservation. Area plans call for buildings with historic character to be preserved and avoiding any impacts to locally designated historic buildings and choosing an alignment. In July of 2015, the HPC reviewed the station area plans and issued a resolution. Had four components to the resolution. One, assessment of historic resources within the area of potential effects should be conducted prior to any decisions being made regarding BRT alignment, station locations, and station design. Two, property impacts to all historic properties should be avoided in choosing a BRT alignment, not just impacts to locally designated historic properties. Three, buildings with historic character should be preserved in all station areas, including Sunray. And four, future recommendations and implementation should be consistent with the historic preservation chapter of the comprehensive plan and chapters 73 and 74 of the St. Paul Legislative Code. The HPC then requested consulting party status to participate in review of the project. This is a bus rapid transit that will connect downtown St. Paul and Woodbury. For this discussion, comments are just going to focus on the proposed station areas. There are 6 proposed stations that will be within historic districts or adjacent to heritage sites. We have 2 in Dayton's Bluff, 847 Hudson, which is going to be a street closure and rerouting, and 657 Conway. In Lower Town, we have 2, 237 4th Street East and 340 Sibley. We have one at the Landmark Center Rice Park, which is 75 Fifth Street West. And then we have one at the National Register listed building at 350 Robert, which is the Manhattan building. This is the Commission's first opportunity to comment on this aspect of the Gold Line BRT. Station areas will include street and sidewalk work to maintain pedestrian sidewalk spaces and areas for buses to pull in from traffic lanes. Comments for this review are limited to the route, station area, possible effects to those areas, or nearby historic resources. Station placement and street sidewalk route should have little or no effect to the historic resources. Station design that will follow later this spring for HPC comment may have effect. So we want to separate those two. We're just looking at the location of the stations right now. There may be some minor alterations to the plan between now and then. Staff is asking for the Commission to delegate staff the ability to comment on any minor issues that may arise with the project, and represent the HPC at future stakeholder meetings. Any major issues that come up, we'd bring back to the HPC, and we'd also be bringing back the stations themselves, the station designs themselves, to the HPC this spring. I did highlight a couple of areas for the HPC to consider. Those included the Dayton's Bluff, 847 Hudson, the street closure and rerouting. I added a photo in the staff report so it was clear what was happening there. Also 657 Conway, in case there's any questions about exactly where there's going. There is quite a large green space between Mounds Boulevard and that dead end area of Conway. And then Lower Town, the two stations that'll be in front of Union Depot. We have a suggested motion. Are there any questions?
Commissioner Bazat.
George, I have a question about, it actually revolves around my own memory capabilities. Did the station at Mounds Boulevard change its location? Was the location for that one changed from first time we ran through this?
I'm not sure. Yeah, you mean back when we saw the initial?
Right. We had a long discussion about the potential proposed locations of the stations, and that was one of them. And then the other one is the Hudson Road station. But perhaps, as I see that there are some folks who likely worked on this,
Yes.
attending the meeting, they may be able to help out on that question.
Yeah, let's save that question for them if we can.
Okay.
And they can, yeah. Any other questions?
Just a comment, Chair, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Bazat.
For the other commissioners, in the report that we received, the packet we received, there's a link to the full report, which is really very, very helpful. I didn't download it as a PDF, but I created a link to it because it has the historic resources information in quite good detail about each of the sites that are called out as no effect with whatever the phrase is, not considerations, but at any rate. So I would urge commissioners to take a look at that because it was helpful for my own understanding of some of the stops other than the Dayton's Bluff ones as well. So just an FYI.
Any other questions for staff at this point? If not, do we have a presentation by the Metro Transit and FTA staff?
We do. I see them on the line.
Yeah. Hi, George. This
All
is
right.
Chelsea Johnson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. All right. So I see that you guys are presenting. We're just discussing, Katie and I, who's the other presenter, if we were going to be able to share our screen, or if you were okay with advancing slides as we request.
I can advance for you.
Okay, sounds good. We'll just let you know when we're ready for the next slide. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chelsea Johnson, and I am the environmental lead for the Metro Gold Line BRT project. We do have a few other staff members, Chris Beckwith, our project manager, and Liz Jones, our outreach coordinator, on the line as well, in case there's other questions that we'd like to answer from project-wide. So feel free to reach out to them as well. But today's presentation will focus on an overview of the project, followed by a discussion of the assessment of effects for historic properties that was presented last month to our consulting parties. Since most of the historic properties evaluated for this project are in St. Paul, actually Katie Honsharing with MnDOT's Cultural Resources Unit will walk through these findings that were prepared as part of the federal Section 106 process. You can go to the next slide, George. Just an overview of our presentation, and then we'll conclude with our next steps and take any questions or comments at that time. Next slide. So last year, we presented an overview of this project to the Commission, and we thought it would be beneficial to provide a similar overview before diving into the assessment to better understand the context. Gold Line is a bus rapid transit project that will be the first of its kind in Minnesota to introduce dedicated bus lanes. So it's a 10-mile route connecting downtown St. Paul. The bus-only lanes will be constructed primarily on the north side of I-1 and introduce 21 new stations along the way. Next slide, please. As you can see here on the project area map, maybe we can clarify some of those questions you had, Commissioner Bazat. The route will serve here in this box. You see the downtown detail in the lower left. The route will serve downtown St. Paul, running between Depot here and Smith Avenue along 6th Street, and then along 10th Street, kind of making a loop downtown. The riders, as you can see on the green line, that's the green line LRT, so riders can connect here at Union Depot as well as 50 Cedar.
Ms. Johnson,
Yeah.
if I can interrupt for a minute, we're kind of losing your sound. You started out really well, and now it's kind of cutting in and out a little bit.
Can you hear me all right now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to lean a little closer. So Gold Line, riders can connect to Green Line at Union Depot.
Oops, now I can't hear you at all. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm wondering if could I try calling in? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe if others can mute, I'm not sure if that's an issue, but I was just describing how you could kind of connect to the Green Line from Gold Line at Union Depot.
You know, it must be something about the way you're speaking into it, because, you know, you start out strong and then you fade.
Should I try calling in? Let me just try. Yeah, I should just try calling in here, switching audio. I'm not quite sure how to do that on Teams. My apologies. Let's see, calling on my phone. Yes, that would be good. Does anyone connect?
You're coming through really clearly right now.
Okay, I was just contemplating connecting to, here, call me. Let's try that. All right, I'm gonna dial in, so give me one moment. Check out the map.
Okay.
2, 3, 1. Oh. Okay, I'm not quite sure how to do that. Are you still able to hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, I'll just stand right in the same spot and hope I transmit all right. So This is our map. So I went over the downtown station. The Mounds Boulevard location, I believe we were contemplating the Mariah station just a couple blocks north of there. Perhaps that was the question earlier about the station changing. So the selected station location is at Mounds Boulevard. That general location has not changed.
Thank
Well,
you. That was the location I thought was original, so appreciate
Great.
that.
Great, perfect. We'll be connecting at Earl Street as well as Etna, and at a station called Hazel, just a little bit east of Wiper Avenue, and Sunray as well. Those are the service stations for the eastern part of St. Paul. We'll also have one station at Maplewood serving 3M, 2 in Oakdale, and 3 in Woodbury. We will also be constructing 3 park and rides. You can see here with the little triangular P at Sunray, Helmo Avenue Station in Oakdale, and then a new one at the terminus, the 494 Park and Ride. We'll also be picking up at the existing Woodbury Theater Station here out in Woodbury as well. In addition to the park and rides, several new bridges will be constructed to accommodate our route. We've got a little bit of terrain, so that's why we need a few bridges. But I would like to point out that we will have a new bridge, the Bielenberg Bridge, crossing 94, connecting the cities of Oakdale and Woodbury with both bus lanes for Gold Line as well as general traffic. So that's a pretty exciting opportunity for these 2 cities. Next slide, please. So what is BRT? BRT is a more efficient line of bus service. It's a cross between local bus and a light rail train, kind of without all of the heavy infrastructure. So it has added features and amenities for riders. It makes fewer stops than a local bus. It has frequent service that goes all day, 7 days a week with limited stops. And since Gold Line will be operating in bus-only lanes, it also allows us to use technology to allow more quote unquote green light time. So buses have fewer delays than operating in regular traffic like local buses or maybe arterial BRT buses that are not in dedicated lanes. So it's similar to light rail in the sense that BRT stations will have a ticket vending machines and other amenities like bike racks, trash bins, and lighting. Also elevated platforms to help improve that boarding to assist with faster service. So that's kind of BRT in a nutshell, how we would operate. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take a minute to provide some background on the environmental process for Gold Line. FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, is our lead federal agency to fulfill our both federal and state environmental analysis requirements. We prepared an environmental assessment that was published, and a finding of no significant impact was issued for Gold Line last year in January 2020. And so that process, you'll see on the next slide when in a minute here, that kind of occurred during our formal project development phase. But, you know, looking at environmental effects, that never really ends with these projects. You know, as design changes, we will be looking at resources to see if there are changes to impacts. And so historic properties certainly fall into that bucket for reevaluation as we do move ahead. Section 106 is the federal process specific to the evaluation of project effects on historic properties. Some of you may be familiar with it, but for the public that may not, I'll just explain a little bit of those components. The process requires identification and survey of historic properties. So this includes anything from historic buildings, historic districts, and archaeology, or the things underground, as I like to tell my friends who don't understand what this resource is. Once survey is complete and we have a clear understanding of the historic property characteristics, the assessment of effects can be completed and consulted on. So findings of an effect can have 3 possible outcomes: a no effect, no adverse effect, and an adverse effect. And these are some terms that Katie will be talking about here in a couple minutes. So I just wanted to put it out there that, you know, an adverse effect is where a project may alter, either directly or indirectly, any of the characteristics that qualify that property for inclusion in the National Register. So anything that would diminish that integrity is what we're concerned about. Consultation is the process to consider measures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate any adverse effects. And our project office goal has always been to provide a project that has considered ways to avoid and minimize effects early in the design process so that we're able to consult to gather information on other ways to mitigate any lingering adverse effects to these properties. For this project, our State Historic Preservation Office is part of Consultation, along with the Maplewood and St. Paul HPC, and other parties with interests such as the cities and the counties, and of course the council as the project sponsor. We're all the consulting parties to this. All right, next slide, please. As I previously mentioned, FTA's environmental decision was issued last year, and assessment and our environmental review never really ends, but we have been advancing design, and Gold Line has a Section 106 agreement with FTA and SHPO to prepare an assessment of effects on advanced design. So this is about a 30% design threshold for the project. This report was formally submitted. You mentioned that there was a link and it had a wonderful detail. I encourage everyone to go check that out. This was submitted last November for review, and we're still currently accepting consulting party and public comments on this document. So as design advances during this engineering phase that we see here on the timeline with FTA, and ultimately as we hit towards 100% design threshold, these findings will be validated, and this is a requirement of our agreement. So we anticipate having future consultation with our SHPO and consulting parties, and as a little placeholder here, I'll outline those timeframes in our next step slides at the end. So for now, unless there's any questions about the project, I'd like to turn it over to Katie, and she'll provide that overview of the project assessment of effects.
Great. Hi, this is Katie Hanskuring. I am a historian with the MnDOT Cultural Resources Unit. I'm one of a team of historians that have been working on this project for the last number of years for the FTA and for the Metro Transit Gold Line project team. As Chelsea mentioned, we have a programmatic agreement with a number of different parties, including the SHPO and FTA, to really look at assessing effects at the 30% design phase, the 60% design phase, and possibly the 90% design phase. Right now, we're in that 30% design phase, and that's really focusing on what George mentioned before, the guideway alignment, station location, the new bridges, pedestrian connections, retaining walls, and stormwater facilities. More specific design details on shelters like form, color, materials, that's typically done at the 60% design phase. So we'll be assessing that element of this project as part of the 106 process at 60%. As Chelsea mentioned, our assessment of effects document was submitted to SHPO and consulting parties for review in November. And we have a link to that PDF, and it sounds like some commissioners have already taken a look at it. Generally, this presentation reflects that document that was provided to consulting parties in November. We have received some comments from consulting parties, but we didn't have time to make those changes as part of this presentation, since the presentation was submitted prior to receiving those comments. So we'll talk a little bit about that. It's going through this, but notably the largest change is that those no effect findings you're seeing in bullet number 3 have become no adverse effect findings, and that's to better align with other project work that's occurring by other Met Transit projects right now. So in total, we've got no adverse effect findings for all of the properties within the project that have been identified, those historic properties that have been identified. We do have 12 properties that have no adverse effect with conditions, and those conditions are placed upon the property to allow us to look at the property again at 60%. And I'll talk a little bit about those individual conditions as we move through this presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first property is Grace Lutheran Church. We'll be moving sort of from east to west through the project. It follows the report itself, so we'll be talking about the properties that way. This property is a historic property located in the eastern part of St. Paul, as you can see in the upper right corner. It has a number of project elements that are happening here. The guideway, which is the sort of pink and gray hashed line at the bottom, will be added. So buses will be running along that southern border of that parking lot. Some noise walls and retaining walls. There's a stormwater pond that is also proposed. That's the blue blob kind of in the left corner of the parcel. That's it's something that will only be retaining water occasionally throughout the year. So it's mostly a green space. Generally, this property never had a formal landscaping, and you can see that the historic boundary of the property, which is in green, isn't affected by the project. So we'll be retaining a lot of the green space, and most of those other project elements are at the far edge of, the view shed of this property. So as a result, there is a no adverse effect finding for this property. So we won't be looking at this property again at 60% unless there are significant design changes that come about between 30% and 60% design. Next slide, please. Johnson Parkway is the next historic property. It's a historic district that is largely green space that extends sort of north-south. The project is proposing to add the guideway and a new bridge, which is really adjacent to the existing I-94 bridge. You can see that in the bottom right-hand corner, as well as some noise walls to compensate for that height of the bridge. This project work will be designed according to the SOI standards to the extent possible. And as part of this continued work on this particular property or within the property's historic boundary, we recommended and FTA agreed that there's a no adverse effect with condition. So this is a conditioned property that MnDOT CRU and the project team continue to consult on this particular historic property to make sure that the bridge design, retaining wall design, and the other design features comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards while meeting the project's purpose and need. So this property will be looked at again at the 60% design level. So just a bus and a bridge. Here. Next property. Okay, so we're moving into properties that fall within Dayton's Bluff Historic District, your locally designated historic district. The property to the south, the Giesenhauser House, that property is outside of the district boundary, but it was a historic property that was identified. It's adjacent to a proposed Maple Street pedestrian bridge. That's an existing bridge that is currently planned to be replaced, largely in kind with a beam and girder bridge at the 30% design phase. That property is listed on the National Register and has a no adverse effect finding. The house itself is set quite a distance away from the new bridge, and the bridge itself is designed in a way that you won't be able to see it due to vegetation and topography. The other property you'll see in the upper left-hand corner is the Texas Company Service Station. We call it the Texaco Station. This property we want to look at again at the 60% level. It has a no adverse effect with condition finding, and that's largely to do with the proposed work that was highlighted within your HPC packet, where there is a guideway being added. So the road here is going from sort of a vehicular use to buses, a striped lane, and then vehicular traffic. And also part of that, the intersection between Bates and Plum and Mounds Boulevard is being closed off. So in order to get to Mounds, you have to go up Bates and then over on a different street. The access points into this particular property, the historic access points, all of the curb cuts, there's 4 of them in total, are being retained by the project, so you can access the property, but the actual physical access, like around, like driving on Plum and then into the property, is going to be affected. So it was determined that we want to take a look at this property again at the 60% design level when we have a little bit more information about how the project itself is going to be constructing that. So that has a condition that we'll be reviewing to make sure the design meets the SOI standards to the extent feasible, reviewing plans to determine how much more consultation we need, and to review plans to see if there's any kind of construction protection plan that's needed to protect the property from the actual construction work that'll be happening on the road. Next slide. Thank you. The Mounds Boulevard station area, there's a number of historic properties that sort of fall within the proximity of the Mounds Boulevard station. And you can see that here. That's where the star is located. You can see the yellow boxes. Those are the actual platforms themselves, the actual stations where one would board onto the bus. It's falling within that green space that George mentioned. It's at the intersection of Kellogg and Mounds Boulevard at the edge of the Dayton's Bluff Historic District. In the historic property that is most in proximity to the station is the Bell Weber House. Now, the Bell Weber House isn't locally designated, but does fall within the Dayton's Bluff Historic District. We have, determined through that project, or through the 30% design phase level, that this is also a property we want to take a look at, again, at the 60% design phase. So it's got a no adverse effect with conditions. And that's largely because, as proposed, there's some street improvement to tie what's happening at the station and the intersection work back into Third Street. And you can see that in that sort of red box that's right in front of the Bell Weber House. So as part of this review, we're going to be looking at the 60% design and construction to see what types of construction methods the project is proposing in front of this property, and to see if there needs to be any kind of construction protection plan for it. That's the Mounds Boulevard station. And then just a quick note, the other properties in blue, if you want to go back, George, just one step. I just want to mention this. Those properties that are located in blue, those are those ones that we had initially noted as no effect, but are now reconsidering based on some other, to coincide some different reports together. But again, outside of the viewshed of the station, and largely will not be affected by the operation of bus rapid transit along Mounds Boulevard at Kellogg. All right, next slide. All right. So we're now entering into downtown more formally. We're in the Lower Town Historic District, which is locally designated, as well as National Register property. There are two different stations that are being proposed. There's one at Sibley and 4th Street, and one at Wakuta and 4th Street. So right across from each other on opposite sides of the Brock, in front of the Union Depot. And I think we had, George had in your packet a good image of those two stations. They're facing east and west respectively. So there are a number of historic properties that were being considered here as part of this particular station location. You've got St. Paul Union Depot, the post office and custom house, the dry goods store, and then also Lower Town in general. The post office and the dry goods store are a distance away from the proposed project activities, so we're not going to talk about them here, but we did want to talk a little bit about Lower Town itself and St. Paul Union Depot. So generally in this location, what's happening is buses will be driving along the route and stopping at the Union Depot Sibley station and the Union Depot Wakuta station. So the improvements here are strictly two additions of these two stations within the Lower Town Historic District. Generally, Lower Town Historic District is characterized by its gridded streets and its collection of 19th century, 19th and 20th century warehouses. And the addition of the two stations largely won't have an effect to the overall district, but we did want to take a closer look at the 60% design phase for the stations that will be located in front of contributing properties to that historic district. So in particular, I forget what the particular property number it was. I have to look it up quick. 237 4th Street, I think, is the one. So that's Samco Samco Company building, which is in the picture there. we want to take a look at that to make sure, one, that the shelter design and the station design itself are compatible with the historic district and aren't encroaching too closely on that property. So that no adverse effect with condition for the Lower Town Historic District, largely because of its proximity to some contributing properties. Similarly, the St. Paul Union Depot has a no adverse effect with conditions as well, and that's just to make sure that the project is going to be designed in according to the SOI standards due to its proximity to those stations and the construction activities that are happening there. Next slide. As we're walking through downtown, so we're moving further to the west, we have the 5th Street and Robert Street stations. This is the 5th and Robert Street station actually falls within the what's called the Urban Renewal Historic District. It's a district that's characterized by mid-century, mid-20th century development, urban planning, that sort of feel to it. So as part of this finding, it's a no adverse effect finding with condition, again, to look at that station design in particular to see how it's really working with the Urban Renewal Historic District and those characteristics that make up that mid-century, mid-20th century historic district. So we're making sure that the station will be designed to the SOI standards, and that we're making sure that also that there's no need for any kind of construction protection plan for contributing properties adjacent to the station that contribute to the Urban Renewal Historic District. Next slide. Similarly, there's an individual historic property, that Manhattan building. George mentioned it's listed on the National Register. It is also, there's sort of 3 different properties here. We've got the Manhattan building, which is the building to in the set of 3, the triptych here to the left on the upper left, Pioneer Press and Endicott, which is the taller building on the right, and the Endicott Arcade Edition. So 3 historic properties, all sort of relating to the 5th Street and Robert Street station. You can see here in the plan drawing that the Manhattan building is actually the one where the platform is being placed right in front of. The Endicott Arcade building is to the left of the Manhattan, so it's that shorter 1-story building. And on the diagram, it would be in that right part of the upper, in the L shape. So where the words 5th Street and Robert Street Station are, just to the right of that sort of starts the Pioneer, the Endicott Arcade Edition. And then to the south is the building, the Pioneer Press and Endicott building. So this particular property in itself, also when we want to take a look at again in a closer detail. So it has a no adverse effect with condition, largely because we want to make sure that that station is designed in accordance with the standards as it relates to the Manhattan building and the Endicott Arcade Edition, as well as making sure that, you know, the project activities themselves are don't cause any sort of unnecessary construction damage during construction. So if we need a construction protection plan. So we'll be looking at this property again at the 60% design phase. Next slide. And then finally, sort of over in the Rice Park Station area, a number of historic properties here to discuss. Obviously, we've got the Landmark Center, which is an important St. Paul location, and the St. Paul Public Library, which is across the street from Rice Park, the auditorium, which is further to the west, the New Palace Theater, Ham Building, and St. Paul Hotel, sort of all kind of coincide in what's called the Rice Park Station area. There are 2 stations proposed on either side of the Landmark Center. One, you can see on the right-hand corner here, the Rice Park Station. So just off the edge of Rice Park in front of the Landmark Center, so that south entry of the Landmark Center, and the Ham Plaza Station, which is located to the north of the Landmark Center and across from the Ham Building. These 2 stations will be replacing existing bus stations that are there today with a slightly larger station platform that extends across the frontage of Rice Park and the Ham Plaza. So a couple of things happening here. The Rice Park Historic District, which is that hashed pink polygon, kind of funny shaped. That is a historic district that we wanted to take a look at again, just to make sure that the Rice Park station itself is, going to be developed and designed in a way that meets the standards and doesn't affect individually, the Landmark Center or the St. Paul Hotel. The St. Paul Hotel itself, which is across the street from the Rice Park station, we're saying has a no adverse effect due to its location and proximity to, those project activities. And similarly, we have a similar kind of situation where at the Ham Plaza station, we want to take a look at the Landmark building again, just to make sure that the proposed construction of that particular station also has no effect to that National Register and locally designated property. And similarly, a no adverse effect finding with conditions for the Ham building. And if you go to the next slide, George, you can see those a little bit more closely. Yep, so you can see the Ham Plaza station, its proposed location. So in the image on the left, its proximity to the Ham building and the Landmark Center. So both the Ham building and the Landmark Center have a recommendation of no adverse effect with the condition that we take a look at the designs more closely to make sure that they meet the standard to the extent feasible, as well as determine if there's any type of, specific construction protection plan that we need to implement in order to determine or, make sure the properties are protected during construction. So that's sort of the assessment of effects in a nutshell, those big properties that, have effect findings with conditions. So no adverse effect for all properties, but some have a condition that we take a look at that the project activities again at 60%. Are there any questions about these particular properties that I can help answer?
This is Chair Kim Kurgan. I'll just run through the commissioners, and if they have questions for you, we'll just go through the roll and they can ask them as I call their name. Commissioner George, do you have any questions for the Metro Transit folks?
Not at this time, maybe at the 60%.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bazat.
As always. So DOT and SHPO folks, you've just encountered the resident. You've just encountered the resident pest on the HPC. I actually have a few questions regarding the 847 Hudson, the Texaco station. If I'm reading it right, and bear with me because they're kind of tiny snapshots and it's difficult to read some of the maps for me, but from what I understand, Hudson Road will be made a one-way for vehicular traffic and the parking will be on the south side of the street as opposed to the north side right now. Is that correct?
Actually, a little bit different. George, would you go back to your agenda and maybe it's easier to see the the project image that you had there.
No, it's on the packet that we received.
It's in the packet.
Yep. And
Okay, the staff report. Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking
Yeah.
at it, but I'm having trouble with it.
Yeah. If you go back to slide 11, so what's happening here is, yes, Hudson will become a one-way. So the road itself is not widening in any way, shape, or form, but what's happening is the actual arrangement of the lanes here is changing. So to the far south against the noise wall, yep, that will be where the buses run. So you'll have buses running east and west, separated by their, stripe lane. And then separating the vehicular one-way traffic going to the west will be a solid striped line. So there'll be no bollards, no pickets, no nothing. So it's all going to stay the same. And then in order to make the correct space, the parking along Hudson, along that north edge of Hudson Road, so just, like south of all of those properties there up to a certain point, is being eliminated. And that gives the project enough space in order to put the two bus lanes and the one-way lane to the west. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And that's what I thought. It's just that I swear I read on the larger report that it was going to be on the south side, which I thought was kind of strange because I figured that's where the transitway was. So thank you.
Yep. And then you can see, so where the Bates and Plum meet, that's going to become, you won't
Right.
be able to go through to Hudson, and that'll become a green space there. And then all of the sidewalks will be reconstructed in kind in that same location, you know, to provide pedestrian access across the street.
Well, and then
Good question.
right in that neighborhood, one of the other addresses that's been called out is 657 Conway. And that's a dead end, right? I mean, it doesn't go through to Mounds Boulevard.
Right.
So I'm a little bit confused. Is that green space at the dead end going to be cut through to Mounds Boulevard to create a stop? Not necessarily a station, but a stop? Or why is 657 Conway called out in our agenda?
George
this
might
is-
be best to
Yeah,
answer
this
that one.
This is George Gauze with staff. That was just the nearest address to this station.
To the Mounds Boulevard station.
Yes.
All right.
That's why we called that out.
So the Greenway isn't, or the BRT guideway isn't going to be cut through. Got it. Never mind. Thank you. That helps. And then a couple of other questions just about, for instance, in any of the reviews, have any like neighborhood meetings been held about the traffic impact of changing Hudson Road? There's a long silent pause here.
Chelsea, do you have any information about the public engagement piece of that?
I'll just
Or any
ask
of the-
Liz to chime in here. Maybe she's still on mute.
Oh, I'm just curious because that's kind of a big change for that corner and that neighborhood.
There
Can
she
you
is.
hear me now? Hi. Can you hear me?
For the moment.
Yeah.
Liz.
I've been having some Teams issues today. Hi, my name is Liz Jones, and I am the Community Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for the project.
Oh, great.
And
Hi.
we've had throughout the past couple of years, we've had a number of engagement with residents in this neighborhood. We've had some individual meetings. We also did some door knocking. There was a time when we were looking at routing, you know, either down what we have now or a different alignment. And so we did a lot of engagement around those options and showed the design. We've also had full corridor wide open houses that folks have attended, as well as engaged with the neighborhood organizations in the group. So we've been in contact with folks in Dayton's Bluff neighborhood pretty regularly. You maybe have seen us in the publication as well. So we try to really, we've definitely tried to, you know, chat with folks as much as we can and get this information out there about the project in general, but then with this localized neighborhood information
Sure.
changes.
Oh, well, I was just curious about the responses more than, I assumed you guys are pretty good about getting in touch with folks. I just wondered about the impact and what you'd been hearing as a summary of what you'd been hearing about that.
Yeah, I could say in general, there's, you know, we tried to maintain parking. Certainly folks want parking to be maintained. We have really high priority was a little bit further down by our Earl Street station, wanted to maintain parking for those businesses. In this neighborhood here, folks were not too concerned about kind of the short area of the loss of parking, just kind of in that area as there's street parking kind of available around in other areas. So it wasn't a huge issue for a lot of the
Yeah,
folks.
I was just thinking, you know, given our weather right now, you know, as long as there's still parking on that particular block, you know, they don't have to park around the corner and then walk. And then last but not least, and I know we're not into design right now, but I was caught by the phrase that the Johnson Parkway Bridge for the guideway will be designed to match the freeway bridge, which is kind of butt ugly. But you didn't hear me say that. So I'm curious about why there are a couple of, I'm trying to think of other bridges across Johnson Parkway that could have been, but I know that I assume, but I hate to assume that there may be a discussion at the HPC at the 60% level of the design of that guideway bridge. Is that correct? Over Johnson Parkway. I'm moving a little eastward here.
Yeah, sure. So, yep, the final design for that bridge will be presented at the 60% design phase. I will say, in terms of sort of what I meant was that the bridge itself is going to be in line with the I-94 bridge. It's not going to be taller. It's not going to be shorter. So it's going to all be kind of one.
Yep.
As you're traveling, you're not going to like necessarily see like, oh my gosh, a giant truss or something like that. So a really streamlined, slim profile that largely is keeping within the Parkway's feel, but we also want to make sure per the SOI standards that it's distinguishable as a new bridge, that it's not, you know, creating a false sense of history or something that's got a lot of rustication on it or something to make you think that it was built in the 20s. So that's what we're going to be focusing sort of on that at the 60% level, is presenting that design.
Will come to the HPC at the 60% review. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That was all, and I appreciate your patience with my questions.
Great questions. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner Bazat. How about Commissioner Douglas? Do you have any questions for Metro Transit?
Yeah, I was just, these maps are so tiny. It is difficult to see. But again, on that the slide that's up, the Texas Company Service Station. So is that the gray area? Is that I-94? So at this juncture, the BRT is running alongside I-94?
It's running along the inside. It's running along Hudson Road between the properties and the noise wall. So no, it's not on I-94.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So are the buses, the BRT, is it electric?
Yeah, I don't believe the BRT, the Gold Line BRT buses will be electric. No, but Chelsea can confirm that.
Yep, I was just going to chime in there. At this time, no, Metro Transit for this project will not be procuring electric buses, just based on some of the results we're seeing right now in terms of getting a charge to last a route. Sort of wanting to get a little bit more information on that before we really jump in with both feet.
Yeah, I'm just thinking because of the impact of pollution and that type of thing, and the effects of the people in the neighborhood. It just seems like it would be better for when it's the 21st century, 21 years into the 21st century. It seems like they would be electric, but I was just assuming that. But you've answered my question. Thank you.
Chair, just to pop in on that query, this is Commissioner Bazat. The larger report available online says that they are planning electric charging stations for potential electric bus use at like 2 or 3 of the stops on the route. So one hopes that they will move in that direction.
Correct. And talking with FTA from an environmental resource perspective, we would have to evaluate that fully. If that were to come to fruition, once the project is constructed. Right now we were entertaining the possibility that there could be the addition of charging stations at the downtown Smith Avenue terminus, and then at the Woodbury 494 terminus, kind of at the beginning and end of routes. But so far with the direction from Metro Transit is not right now, not today.
Thank you. Commissioner Perotka, do you have any questions for presenters?
I do. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Regarding the mentioned bike racks on the vehicles, Chelsea, would you mind talking a little bit more about those? Are they the bike racks that are like in the front of the conventional buses that we have now that can hold 2 bikes, or are they more expansive than that? And what type of coordination has the Gold Line done with the Capital City Bikeway design study program for downtown? Thank you. It's my first question.
Sure. I think I was mentioning bike storage facilities of being an amenity available on the station as opposed to the bicycle storage on the bus. There will be bike storage available on the BRT buses, and I think I might defer to Chris, and certainly Elizabeth, if there's been outreach with the second part of your question. But I'm assuming here that we'll see the bike storage on the bus in a similar manner as we've seen before. But Chris or Liz, feel free to chime in if I'm wrong with that assumption. Design changes so quickly these days. They're always coming up with something new and more effective.
Well, and this is a huge project.
Correct. Yep.
So this is Chris Beckwith. So the question is, will there be bike storage like inside of the bus or external to the bus? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, will bicyclists have access to the coaches to where they can store their bikes and also take the Gold Line downtown and then ride their bikes on the new bike paths?
So yes, there will be bike storage on the bus, but I don't know that we haven't begun the design for the bus yet. So we don't know if it'll be interior to the bus or if it will be an external bike rack.
Okay, well, it's good to know that it's a consideration. Thank you.
Yes.
And also I have another question regarding the aesthetics and the sensitive design of the stations and the bike racks and storage areas and the pay booths and whatnot. Has there been any thought at this early stage, since they're going to be bringing people to these amazing locations that happen to coincide with the bus stops, that they can be some way interactive to say to the commuters, it's like, here you've arrived and welcome to Rice Park. Welcome to Dayton's Bluff. Welcome to Mounds Park. Is there an interactive quality as opposed to just an aesthetic quality of the consideration for the bus stops?
That's another good question, and I believe has been brought up as a topic as well. And similar to the bike rack design, I think it's a little early on in the process. I do know there's been a lot of discussion just from the ADA community standpoint that I'm sure Liz and Chris could chime in on as well, but just having consistency of the layout for the station site being very important, particularly for those that are visually challenged, is one aspect to our design that we're taking very, very carefully into consideration. And part of that could be audio, hearing the announcement of the stations. I'm not sure that there has been a decision on the detail of that yet, if that would be incorporated, because we do have the real-time signage information on that we'll have at each and every station that lets you know where you are. But as far as being on the bus and things announced, I know that there's been discussion, but again, I think that's all part of the overall design of the buses, which I believe is further down the road for us at this point. But if there's further clarification that either Chris or Liz or my team wants to add, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah. This is Chris Beckwith again. So I would think it'll be an experience similar to what you see on what you hear on a light rail station, where there will be announcements on when the next bus is arriving and things like that. But I think you were asking if you were biking, would there be an announcement made as you were biking onto the station? Is that what you were asking?
I was asking more, it's like, if there's the interactive quality, of course, I use public transportation and ride my bike. I don't have a car. This is a really exciting project for me. Making St. Paul a more walkable city, etc. And highlighting, but since so many of the bus stations are going to be at historic venues that can be highlighted, will there be something interactive that says you're at Rice Park? It's been a park in the heart of St. Paul since 1852 or something like that. If there will be audio spots where you can have an app with your phone that can tell you about Rice Park or Landmark Center or Ham Plaza, or the Ordway, or places in Mounds Park or Dayton's Bluff. But it does sound like you've well explained that it's awfully early for these types of details, but it's sounds like something you even may have considered.
Yeah, and this is Chris Beckwith again. What you're describing, I've heard of that at a different transit system of scanning a QR code and then it telling you a bit about the area. So it's definitely been done, and it's a very interesting idea that I think we should take down. Now, I don't know if Liz was the one who has seen that in action, or it might be another staff person that's not here today that I know has seen that somewhere else.
No. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay. Commissioner Nelson, do you have any questions?
No questions. I want to compliment you on the staff, that is, on the completeness and clarity of the presentation. It's very helpful. And then I just want to agree with Commissioner Perotka about the wonderful opportunity that may be presented here. Suburbanites coming in from Woodbury and Oakdale, and truly, there's no history there. But one of the things that our city has that is an advantage is the history that we do have. And if there is a way to use these buses and the communications within to highlight the historical scenes that people, when they look up from their telephones, to see out the window, is a really terrific idea. And so just please remember and look into it when you can. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. Commissioner McDonald?
Yes, thank you. I don't have any questions, but I do have one comment. I too would like to say that the Gold team has done a very thorough job in terms of planning and research and design, and they should be complimented very highly. And it gives great hope for the 60% design process for the various pieces that are still in process. So it's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonald. Any other questions from the commissioners? If not, is there a motion and a second for the application?
Oh, shoot.
Commissioner Bazat, Commissioner Perotka.
I move that the HPC concur with the Gold Line BRT proposed station areas and looks forward to reviewing the proposed station design when available, and delegates to staff the ability to comment on minor issues that may arise with the project as per presented testimony, submitted documentation, and information provided in the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner Bazat. Do I have a second for that?
I second Commissioner Perotka.
Thank you, Commissioner Perotka. We'll have commission deliberation now on that motion. Commissioner George, do you have any thoughts or comments on the motion?
No, I think the motion is good at this time, and I would, again, like to say we've had a very, very educational presentation regarding this, the BRT.
Thank you. I was trying to mute myself because I've got the dreaded leaf blower going next door now. Commissioner Brt, do you have any thoughts or comments on the application?
Only that we did get a second to the motion, correct?
Yes, we did.
Yes,
Okay,
it was
thank
Commissioner
you.
Peroutka.
No, I support the motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Douglas?
I'm for the motion.
Commissioner Peroutka. So we're just in discussion here. We're not voting actually right now. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Peroutka, do you have any thoughts or comments to add to the discussion?
Yes, I certainly do. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to join the other commissioners for thanking the Gold Team representatives for such a wonderful job of explaining things. This is an amazing project. When I first heard about it a few years ago, I was skeptical about the impact and the footprint it would have on the various historic structures and landscapes of the city. But I'm more and more convinced, especially after today's presentation and the staff report, that this is a fantastic investment for several neighborhoods in St. Paul and the wonderful surrounding communities, the greater St. Paul area. In the Twin Cities, it will provide for a more walkable city, a more enjoyable city, a more carbon neutral city. It'll bring people, eyes and ears, touch and feel into different neighborhoods, which will provide guardianship and also encourage cultural and social interest and ownership in St. Paul. So yes, I'm really excited about the Gold Line project, and thanks again to the team and the staff for their presentation again today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Peroutka. Commissioner Nelson, do you have any thoughts or comments to add to the deliberation?
Nothing more from me.
Thank you. Commissioner McDonald?
No further comments.
Thank you. Any further deliberation? If not, I'll call for a vote on the motion to adopt the or accept the application. Commissioner George.
I support the suggested motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Brt?
Aye.
Commissioner Douglas?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Peroutka?
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
And Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
And the motion is passed. Thank you. And thank you. I'd also like to say thank you to the team for Metro Transit for that very helpful presentation and for all the good work you're doing and probably all the good work you will continue to do on that project. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today. And then our next item is our commissioner discussion, or our commission discussion on the documentary Race, the Power of Illusion, the House We Live In. George, am I to be leading this discussion, or are you planning on doing that? Or
I have a small thing that I got from the PBS website. I just wanted to, maybe it kind of frames the discussion a little bit. So Race, the Power of Illusion, the House We Live In, is the first film about race to focus not on individual attitudes and behavior, but on ways our institutions and policies advantage some groups at the expense of others. The subject is the unmarked race, white people. We see how benefits quietly and often invisibly accrue to white people, not necessarily because of merit or hard work, but because of racialized natures of our laws, our courts, our customs, and perhaps pertinently our housing. Colorblind policies which ignore race only perpetuates these inequalities, as Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun wrote. To get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. There is no other way. As the house we live in shows, until we address the legacy of past discrimination and confront the historic meanings of race, the dream of equality will remain out of reach. So as part of the educational component of this, the discussion component, there were 4 questions. And I think we can just leave this open and have it be a real open discussion. But the 4 questions are, did the documentary change or challenge any of your assumptions? Did anything in the documentary surprise you? 2 weeks from now, what will you remember the most and why? And how do you feel about the explicit racism of the past? So I had a couple of thoughts that I can throw in for you all to discuss. I've seen this video now a couple of times. The first time I saw it was when I first came to the city of St. Paul. This component was part of our staff diversity and equity training. I hope it still is. And I remember, and that's been several years now, and I watched it again when I was trying to get this so you guys could view it, and then we figured out it was on YouTube and free, because the city was paying something to have this video. But the 2 main things that always stood out to me were the history of the FHA loans and how they used race as a criteria. Race was a criteria for getting a loan, which just seems crazy. And the second was that there was a statement in the video about urban renewal, and that 90% of the housing and buildings destroyed by urban renewal never was replaced. So, and I think that myself and Christine and Allison, in our education as preservationists, we study a lot about urban renewal. That seems to be what created preservation. That was not the main thing, but I think it was the final straw that really shown people that we need to be preserving our areas of important historic resources and character. So my couple of my comments, I didn't want to hog the whole discussion, but I think we just open this up and give everybody some time to talk.
Well, this is Commissioner Kimker. A couple of things I would just say is, I was aware of a lot of those issues about the FHA and the redlining and the lack of wealth accumulation due to past discrimination and I should say past discrimination. I mean, anyway, the film was good, or the documentary was good in sort of putting that stuff into, better focus and better clarity for me, and, getting a better understanding of how that really all transpired. And the other, but as to the last question, I guess it seems to me it's a little bit optimistic to think that explicit racism is in the past. This is in the past because it's 25 years ago now, but I know that when I was looking for my house in the Lexham area, I had not very subtle hints from some insurance people and some real estate some of the real estate people that were showing me houses, or that I was visiting houses, about the kind of people that were living right in the neighborhood and that. So, and just recent events would suggest that this is not a thing that we can comfortably put in the past. Commissioner Brzot.
I think Commissioner Peroka's hand might have been up first, but I just, I think, first of all, because I've been working on the Racial Covenants Project, the Mapping Prejudice Project, since way before George Floyd's murder. In a way, I was lucky because I was confronted with the actual language in these covenants that was appalling to my naivete in its explicitness about to whom the residence could not be sold, and within which certain races could not live within the residence on a particular property that contained these racial covenants. And then, following this, it was at least 6 months or longer before May of 2020. And the events then, and finally, people bringing out into the open the words structural racism and folks not understanding it, everything knit together. And I encourage people to look at the Mapping Prejudice website and look at the maps they've created. They've also got a red line map for Minneapolis. There was one that was reproduced in the film, but when you bring it right down to your block, it becomes a lot more real to you. And I grew up in South Minneapolis. There didn't happen to be a lot of racial covenants there, but just as I was graduating from high school in South Minneapolis, Central High School was closed, and it became an interesting experiment, essentially, and to be honest about it, in integration. So feeling like I've lived through a little part of it from the position of white privilege, all of this stuff really came home. I think it is one of the best videos I have ever seen on the topic, but there's an enormous amount of reading to be done that's fascinating. And just as an aside, as part of this What's Out There Weekend Landscape Project event coming up this coming fall, I've been doing research on some of the sites, and one of them is Rondo Plaza. And if folks haven't been there, you should visit. They include a whole bunch of historic panels that are centered on Rondo. It includes the red line maps for St. Paul, and it includes racial covenants from Ramsey County, and it makes it real, and it makes you think about it a lot. And a lot of the property deeds that I worked on were from the 50s, and it seemed that it was very strange because all of a sudden, starting in about the early to mid 1950s, a new clause began to be inserted into deeds that were financed by the FHA that said you could not restrict the property on the basis of race. It was a very simple statement, but it was a surprise because after that, I didn't find in any of the later deeds that I researched, I didn't find a single racial covenant. So, then you begin to feel, oh, things changed, everything's fine, and you realize it didn't change. So yeah, it was underscoring yet again for this white privileged baby boomer that all the things I worked in high school really haven't changed that much. So it's tough.
Commissioner Douglas?
Oh, thanks, but I think there was someone else up before me.
Leetta, you
Yours
can
is
go
the only
before
one.
I can
I
go.
guess you're just gonna have to jump in if because I don't have everybody on the screen here. I don't have.
Oh, okay.
Brooke, so.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say that, wow, you know, this is very profound. I mean, I've experienced this, you know, most of my life, especially as a child with, you know, my family and my relatives and everyone. But, you know, I think that the film just really showed proof of systemic racism. And there's so many people today, you know, who, you know, and throughout the country who will say, oh, there's no such thing as systemic racism. And I, you know, I guess it's because if you've never felt it, you know, you just don't know it exists, which is, you know, this is 21st century. I don't see how that's possible, but I know there are people who don't. And it just, you know, solidifies how it happened and how it existed for so long, and I'm sure still exists today. But the other thing that was kind of profound for me in the film was, I mean, and I knew it, but it also showed how European Americans have discriminated against other Europeans. And it really brought that out. And I thought that's very interesting. You know, not only, you know, there has been a lot of racism, a lot of people who are been racist, but against people of color, but also against people of, so say was it the Southern Europeans and the Eastern Europeans?
Yep.
And actually, but I mean, so what well, I know they discriminated against the Irish when the Irish came to America, and they discriminated against the Italian, you know, people. And I mean, it's just amazing to me as an African American person, you know, that it wasn't just, you know, people of color. It's just very interesting to me. So, yeah.
Well, Leetta, would you comment on that? I mean, the whole time I was watching it, I was thinking about the conversation you had about the development at Lexington and Dale, and how the people in the neighborhood who are predominantly African American were just not listened to. I mean, this thread, I was just thinking about you the whole time. This thread persists today, and only a couple of us heard you talk about that, but I'd really appreciate it if you'd share it briefly with the group, because I think it just resonated with me when I watched the film.
Oh yeah, I think you're talking about the project, the Wilder Land at Lexington and University.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so, well, there's that land, and it's still there now. Wilder owns the land, and my organization, Aurora St. Anthony, wanted to purchase that land or acquire it to do housing, low-income housing and moderate, you know, income housing for neighborhood people. And so we went to meet with the developer that actually, I assume they had purchased the land, as Wilder said that there was somebody else who was doing that. So anyway, so we met with that developer, and so we asked him if we could go in with them as partners or whatever. And they said no, they didn't need us. You know, they didn't, you know, they didn't need anything we could do for them because they had lots of investors. And so they went on to develop the project, and it's pretty much market rate housing. You know, and most of the people in the neighborhood cannot afford market rate. I don't know if you all know what that is, but it's like, well, I know their specific project. It was a studio apartment for $1,200, one bedroom for $1,500, two bedroom for $2,000, three bedroom $3,000, and if they had four bedrooms, $4,000. And you know, and it's just it's you know, it's just astonishing how, you know, they want to bring that into a neighborhood that's a working class neighborhood. And but you know, it's like they just didn't even care. You know, and so the people that would come in, had been this project had been going on for, I'd say, good 5 years, and they've been having meetings and, you know, trying to have people in the neighborhood coming to the meetings and stuff. But you know, it just like they don't listen to the people that live in the neighborhood. It's like, it's gentrification. I don't think they really care about the people in the neighborhood. They just want to come in and purchase the land and build, and build, and then it's for, market rate housing of people with upper incomes. It's just not affordable. And it borders on like I said, the Rondo community, and there's a historic value to the land too. It was the home of the St. Paul Saints. I mean, many years ago, and the infamous Negro Leagues baseball players that played at that stadium years ago. I know my father used to go to those games, and so the land is it's significant to the Rondo community. A lot of those guys that played on those teams, they lived in the grew up and lived in the Rondo neighborhood, and so when you run into that type of thing, it's just, it's very frustrating. And I don't know if that's that's what you want me to talk about, Bart, but it's just, I wonder how my dad even bought his house. The house that we have, it's on Fuller Avenue, and it's 2 blocks over from University Avenue, which I don't know. We got it in 1954. I was a baby almost, and I don't. The Rondo neighborhood, I don't know if it even extended over there. Although when we moved in, our neighbors were African-American people, but majority white people in the neighborhood. And I just wonder how my father was able to purchase it, and because I know about the redlining and I did a project. I don't know if you already, it was Nellie Francis, and she lived in the Rondo neighborhood, back in the late 1800s and so I did a lot of research about the neighborhood. So that's been an African American community for over like 150 years, and so and it's because African American people were not allowed to live anywhere else, pretty much. So they had to come to that neighborhood, although they felt safe because they were amongst each other. It's been called slum. I know, because that's why they put the 94 freeway through our neighborhood, because they said it was a slum. But the people who lived there ran the gamut. There were poor people who lived there, middle income people, upper middle income. Wealthy African Americans lived in that neighborhood because we were not allowed to go anywhere else, So it was really a wonderful neighborhood. And, so I guess in some ways that redlining, although it was horrible, it kind of helped the African American neighborhoods across America. So I'll stop. I could go on and on.
I just want to say a few things. Oop.
Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, okay, thanks a lot, Steve. I just want to say a few things. I remember seeing this program when it was originally aired on PBS. It was quite groundbreaking. It is generally accessible, but 18 years later, and after the murder of Mr. George Floyd, I understand that it has to be generally accessible, but I found it mild. The idea that our founding fathers, like Thomas Jefferson's emotional attitude about race was based on the way people smelled. When I read his Thomas Jefferson's notes on Virginia, I was like, what? He's really making moral statements about people on the basis of what he thinks they smell like? It was an awakening. And so I'm glad that the video covered that. But I did think it was mild. But something I remember 18 years later, and that I was reminded of, is that the Supreme Court did render a decision in the 1920s that being white is something that is subjectively understood, not scientifically proven. And now that we have genetic testing and our identities can, and it's upending history, the more genetic testing we do. It seems that genetic identities, racial identities, ethnic identities, somebody who sees themselves as African American might not have an African cultural identity, or might have based their African American identity on being African. It's a lot of our definitions have changed too, with knowing more about genetics and being able to do genetic testing. But overall, I thought it was good and generally accessible, but really in after 2020, very, very non-offensive and mild. Thank you.
This is Steve George. I just want to say to that regarding the Ms. Douglas's statements about how with different cultures in North America, there's a wonderful book called American Nations. It's a history of the 11 rival regional cultures of North America. And it talks about, as she said, talked about the Italians and the Jewish and different people who moved into America and how they were persecuted. And this goes into that very, very clearly and very interesting. The American Nations, it's a wonderful book. And I just wanted to say that I grew up in central Minnesota, and on one hand, I would say there was no racism because we were all Norwegians and Swedes and maybe a German. But when I joined the military at the age of 18 and ended up in the South in training, it was a wide awakening for me. And the first thing said to me as I got off a plane was, "Yankee, the war ain't over." And when I responded with that and said, "Well, I know, Vietnam is still going on." And then I thought, wait a minute, that's not the war he's talking about. So spending all those years and kind of growing up in the 60s and being involved in that, the racial issue, I really learned a lot. And it's just the movie that we watched was, really kind of an interesting thing, because I think a lot of us don't realize, the race issue until we think about it. And growing up, we just never thought about it. So if anybody wants to borrow my book, they can, or if they just want more information on it, please feel free to ask me.
Thank you, Commissioner George. Anybody else want to jump in on this discussion?
Well, this is Nelson. I'll add a little bit. Book recommendations. I did send around 3 earlier, and I particularly want to recommend The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, if you want to be depressed. And really, I thought...
Paul, I'm having a little difficult time hearing you. It's kind of soft. Can you maybe speak more directly into the phone?
How's this? Rothstein's book is a little bit more pointed, actually, than the role of the government was portrayed in the video. He's a lot more angry about it than the people in the video. Also, on the issue of eugenics, which was mentioned in the video, by the way, I thought the video was terrific. I've seen 2 out of the 3. There's a terrific book by Daniel Okrent called The Guarded Gate, which is about so-called scientific eugenics and the restrictions on immigration that came to fruition in the Immigration Act of 1924. two people who were interviewed, a Jewish couple who were living in Levittown, I think. And they talked about how the FHA restrictions on mortgage lending were an opportunity missed. I thought those two were right on the mark. There's a really interesting book which you can find called Privately Developed Interracial Housing, published in 1860. And a really interesting book published by the University of California. And one of the things that the authors found was that where private housing was in fact integrated, when they did surveys with the white residents, they thought, oh, there's really no problem here having black neighbors. But for white people who didn't have contact with black people, the idea of having black neighbors filled them with fear. So it was an example of how reality was much milder, much more positive than the fears that people had. And I guess another thing, I'll just say one more thing. The Supreme Court cases on who's white and who's not was a very graphic reminder of one way you can look at the history of our Supreme Court is one disastrous error and blunder after another. So, we do tend to hold the Supreme Court up as a progressive and wise institution, but that's only one way of looking at its history. So, George, thanks for the recommendation. Those videos are really good. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. Anybody else?
Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Bazant?
I was just going to say that the other thing I was thinking as I was watching this is that I think the HPC is in a good place in terms of, we're not going to solve everything, but the more we push about cultural context studies and cultural context designations, the more we can move the idea that a beautiful Beaux-Arts building is the only historic structure possible for historic preservation. I think given all of this, neighborhoods are truly important. And the background and the reasons, as Commissioner Douglas was saying that she was surprised looking back on it now, how her father was able to get a mortgage on Fuller Avenue, given the context at the time. So in the early to mid 50s. So I think it's just should be yet another spur for the commission to work towards education about what a cultural designation means. How deep those can go and what a firm foundation they can have for the future. Not just there's so many examples of cities who have begun to recognize the importance of working class neighborhoods and neighborhoods like Rondo and Frogtown, and why they're important to the history of the city, and not just to the history, but to who we are now. So I think it can be a spur for us to continue working towards that and get some definitions down and really nail down some examples of places that are important. I think we ran into some of that when we saw the Miriam Park survey about the kinds of things that weren't called out and the kinds of residences based on who lived there that weren't called out. And things like the stadium, the soccer stadium survey, where things like the Hamlin Hotel, where Bayard Rustin stayed, were just considered insignificant by the writers of that report, whereas I think a lot of us believe that it is significant. So we're sort of poised to be able to pick up the ball and run with it, if we want to do a sports metaphor, given it's the day after Super Bowl, which I didn't watch. But so there, I get really wound up and enthusiastic about this, so I apologize. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner Bazant. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Perotka. I just wanted to say a few things inspired by Commissioner Bazat and talking about how we as a commission can be supportive of cultural districts. For example, I've pointed out a few times on the public record during these meetings that there used to be 11, not all at the same time, but throughout its history, 11 temples and synagogues on the west side of St. Paul. Not one exists now. But what a historic district, because the built structures don't exist, can't capture, a cultural district could. And so it might be something we want to discuss more and more, maybe even have an organized full committee of all members talking about talking about cultural districts, but also how we as a commission can support other organizations and leaders in St. Paul who are also going forward and connecting with history, with community, with cultural landscapes. For example, all of the work that Marvin Anderson is doing with the Rondo Bridge, and how the commission could be supporters and allies of Mr. Anderson's work and the people that are working with him. Anyway, that's just a comment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Commissioner Bazat.
I just wanted to thank the staff and the department for giving us this opening. You know, asking that we view this and then provide us a space for discussion.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I think it was a good discussion, and we should do it again. If there's nothing else on that, then we'll move on to our last item of business, which is the nomination of officers for 2021. I assume we're going to have some comments or thoughts by the a presentation by the nomination committee.
George, I can do that.
Yep, go ahead, Barb.
The nominating committee met. It was Commissioner George, Commissioner Douglas, and myself, with George present, staff present, and the person of George Gauze. It was posted to the agenda, sort of the minutes and the slate, and I would like to move the slate forward for discussion and move that the nomination consists of current chair Teresa Kimker as chair and Commissioner Paul Nelson as vice chair. As an addendum to that motion, I would like to say that what we learned in our committee meeting is that the position of secretary existed as an actual position at the beginning of the HPC back in the 70s or 80s, whenever it happened, because there was no staff. So the secretary actually had to take the minutes, write them up, distribute them. And now that we have the transcripts and that the minutes are provided for us, we did not select a nominee for the secretary position. In addition, both the nominees for chair and vice chair have accepted via email these nominations. So I move them to the table and would appreciate a second and then discussion.
This is Commissioner George, I second.
I think before we go to that, we need to see if anybody has questions for the nominating committee or whether there are any other further nominations.
I think by Robert's rules, you need to call for nominations 3 times, and I'm not sure if we want to be super technical about it, whether or not you should turn the chairship as a nominee over to the vice chair. So I don't know. I will default to staff on that.
I'm happy to do that if Commissioner George, if you want to.
No, I'm just saying.
So
I
Barb,
would be happy to.
yep,
Go
Barb's
ahead.
right. So since Terry is on the nomination, she will have to relinquish control of the meeting to the vice chair, who is not part of the nomination.
This is Commissioner George, and I will do that. Terry, is that okay with you?
Yes, that's fine. Steve, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, we have, from the nominating committee, we have actually for chair, Teresa Kimker, and for vice chair, Paul Nelson. Do we have, and I will ask this 3 times before, do we have other nominations? Are there further nominations? Are there further nominations? Hearing none, I would suggest to the maker of the nomination, Barbara Bazette, if she would agree to a vote from right now for the 2 people. I'm trying to think of the word I'm trying.
No, that's
Go
okay.
ahead,
We
Barb.
might want to open it for discussion. There's a motion been made and seconded. We can open it for discussion and then have the vote. As I recall, that's the order of business.
Well, I thought that on an election thing, it was purely, if there were no other nominations, we could have a unanimous vote and be done with it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, but you're probably right, so go for it.
Yeah, this is George, and I'm looking at my Robert's rules. So, yeah, exactly. So if all commissioners agree to the nomination, then the chair just simply needs to say there being no further nominations on the floor, I declare this slate presented by the nominating committee to be the elected by acclamation. And we're done.
And so be it. This is Commissioner George, so what George said. Therefore, hearing no other nominations.
Wait. This is Commissioner Perotka. I don't have an objection, but I want to know what the chair of the commission, the vice chair, does, and if we're removing the position of secretary, or are we just leaving it vacant?
We can't remove it.
Well,
We have to change the bylaws before we remove it. We are simply leaving it vacant. There is no one in the position right now. And we are putting forward this slate for acclamation, since there were no other nominations, as an election or acclamation for chair and vice chair.
How long are the terms?
1 year.
And what are the responsibilities of chair and vice chair? Not the details, but just necessarily, to chair meetings, and the vice chair chairs meetings if there's not, if the chair isn't present. Just an overview so we have an idea of what the positions we're voting on.
So this is George. So the chair runs the meetings for the commission. If the chair is not available, then the vice chair would have to run the meeting. If neither of those are available, since there's not going to be a secretary position, then it would be the person of seniority that is currently on the commission and then we go from there. The chair and vice chair are also part of the executive committee. They make up the executive committee, and so that could mean that they are involved in anything having to do on a higher level with the department director, something like that. But that's really all. I mean, now that there is a full-time staff on the commission, the secretary doesn't keep minutes. They don't take care of applications or anything like that. So there was a lot of those details with the early commission, with the first commission when it was formed. So now it's really just running of the meeting. So
Thank you, George.
and it's up to the commission. If the commission wants to just leave the secretary position unfilled for now, you can do that. You can also ask staff to give you an amendment to the bylaws, and we could eliminate that position completely. It's up to you. I checked with the city attorney's office, and there's nothing in state rules that require us to actually have anyone beyond a chair, frankly. So.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Anybody else have questions? Okay, hearing none, I then state that Teresa Kimpler and Paul Nelson are the new chair and vice chair, and the position of secretary at this time has left unfilled. Harry, take it over. Congratulations to Teresa and Paul.
Thank you.
Congratulations, you guys.
Appreciate your vote of confidence.
Congratulations.
Hoping I will be able to do this as in person again someday.
Yeah, so do I.
And with
Fingers
that,
crossed here.
I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Second,
Second.
anybody opposed? We are adjourned. See you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Take care.